Hey, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. Welcome to the seminar, Unlocking Value, Using Communication Strategies and Approaches to Increase Evaluation Use, organized by the UNEG Use of Evaluation Working Group. My name is Hoshika Miyata, and I'm from the Evaluation section of the Business Transformation and Accountability Division at DMSPC. I'm also one of the co-leads of Workstream 1 on good practices for evaluation use within the UNEG Use of Evaluation Working Group. So a little bit about the UNEG Use of Evaluation Working Group, in case we have colleagues who are not familiar. The working group consists of 3 work streams. The Workstream 1 focuses on enhanced use of evaluation through the organization of a series of webinars and a compendium of good practices. Workstream 2 focuses on enhanced measurement of use of evaluation through the definition of a clear framework for an additional suggested UNEG-wide indicator for measuring use. And the last workstream, Workstream 3, focuses on enhanced understanding of use of UN evaluation evidence by external stakeholders through the conduct of a study on understanding the use of UN Commission's evaluations by external stakeholders. So please reach out to our working group coordinators, Elena Lapo and Katinka Koke, if you're interested to find out more about the work that our working group does. So without further ado, let me pass the floor to our first speaker from UNESCO, Katia Sidiakina Riviere. Katia is the Principal Evaluation Specialist at the UNESCO Evaluation Office, where she conducts program evaluations and leads capacity development initiatives in evaluation for UNESCO staff. She will share the good practices and lessons learned in communicating evaluations at UNESCO. Katia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hoshika. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. And thank you very much to the Use of Evaluation Working Group for having me today. I'm not a communication focal point, but I'm very much interested in communication. And when the group contacted me, I thought it was a nice challenge to start thinking about the way that we can link evaluation, use, and communication and what we have been doing at UNESCO. So I wanted to share our experience. So today I'm going to first look at some of the possible uses of evaluation and how these uses can be linked with communication and what we can do as evaluators in communicating throughout the different stages of an evaluation process. And then I'm going to present some concrete examples of what we have been doing at UNESCO in trying to communicate better with stakeholders throughout our evaluations. So first, I wanted to just put this out there, and I know that much thought has been given to this. There's literature out there, and the Use of Evaluation Working Group is obviously working on this topic and giving it a lot of thought. They shared with me a study done by UNEG in 2016 on evaluation use, and in the study there are 3 types of evaluation use. And I think the first one is kind of the most obvious one. So instrumental use for all of us, if we do an evaluation and an evaluation generates recommendations and these recommendations are all implemented, then we're really happy and we think our evaluation has been used. But we know that that's a pretty difficult journey sometimes. And just because that doesn't always happen, that doesn't mean that an evaluation doesn't get used. So then there's also conceptual use, and conceptual use happens when stakeholders engage with evaluators, the way they see their program or their intervention changes as a result of their engagement with evaluators. So conceptual use is actually quite important. And then there's process use, and process use happens when those same stakeholders can implement changes throughout their project due to, again, the interactions that they've had with evaluators. So they have learned through the process of interacting with evaluators, and they have already implemented certain changes, and I think we can consider that to be quite important use, which is process use. So I wanted to focus today on process use because I think this is where we can make the most difference as evaluators. And this is where the way we communicate throughout an evaluation process can make the most difference. So for me, use is a journey throughout the evaluation process. And again, the way we communicate throughout the evaluation process is just as important as the way we communicate at the end of the evaluation process. And I distinguish between the two, but by the end here, I mean when we've come to our findings and the way we present our findings through different evaluation products. And whereas throughout the process, that's when we engage with our stakeholders throughout the different phases of evaluation. So the UNEG study and also another UNICEF study that was done in 2020 on influential evaluation have identified a number of factors that affect evaluation use. And what I tried to do is to break these down and think about the consequences of each one in the ways that we communicate in evaluation. So the first of these factors is to engage stakeholders throughout the evaluation process. Now, what does that mean? So that means we try and engage them from the onset. When does the evaluation start? But how do we do that? How do we communicate? How do we manage to engage them? How do we manage that they stay engaged throughout the evaluation process? We know that we're all different, so it takes kind of targeted evaluation strategies to make sure that we keep these people engaged. Then we know that for an evaluation to be useful, we need to have commitment from senior management. But to get that commitment, again, it requires targeted communication efforts from our behalf. So how do we get them on board from the onset and make sure they stay interested and eventually implement any recommendations that will be addressed to them? Recommendations, in order for them to be relevant and feasible, in order for them to be used. But again, we always talk about smart recommendations. They can be well-crafted recommendations, but if we don't communicate them in the right way to the right audiences, they may just not be on people's radars and then not get implemented. So again, I think this has consequences for the way that we communicate. And then we come to the part in the evaluation when findings become available. And here, I think it was also very interesting for me to read in the UNICEF study on influential evaluations that one of the key determinants to evaluation use are the products that come out of an evaluation and the communication strategies that are used to communicate these products. And so here, there is, of course, one of the main steps where we share findings with our stakeholders, but we know that our stakeholders are all very different and they respond to messages and information in different ways. So here we have to think about what are the best ways to communicate with our stakeholders. And in follow-up on evaluation, again, that requires additional communication efforts from our part, because if we don't communicate during the follow-up phase, then usually an evaluation just gets forgotten and becomes a report on a shelf. So I wanted to, taking that into account, all those 5 aspects, I now wanted to go into some concrete examples from our experience at the UNESCO Evaluation Office to share what has worked and maybe what has not worked so well. The first aspect that I mentioned was stakeholder engagement throughout an evaluation process. And we know that in order for us to engage our stakeholders, first we need to know who they are. And so to do this, we always systematically, before we even draft the terms of reference, we do a thorough stakeholder mapping. And we do this even through document review, but also by conducting interviews and just asking people, who do you think we should talk to? Who should be involved? And so, yes, it takes time, but it's really worthwhile because this gives us a comprehensive picture or web of all the different stakeholders. And then we develop a communication strategy. So we think about what are the best ways to engage these different potential users and at what stage of the evaluation process. So one of the things we've started doing, and we haven't always done this, is we've started to have individual meetings with project staff and members of reference groups and even sometimes project partners before we even develop draft terms of reference. So one example I can use is an evaluation I worked on last year, which was of UNESCO's periodic reporting on cultural conventions. So UNESCO has 10 different normative instruments in the field of culture. So we have 10 different teams that work on these instruments and that work on reporting. And before we started the evaluation, we met physically with all these teams to try and understand how things work, but also ask them how do you want this evaluation to work for you? What do you want to learn? What are the questions that you want answered? And honestly, having these physical meetings, and physical, I mean not on Teams, so we really tried to have them in the office to establish that personal contact. It really facilitated the rest of the evaluation process because as we had engaged them through in-person meetings at the beginning, then, when we shared the draft terms of reference, we actually received feedback from everybody. So I think this was much more effective than just, creating our reference group like we used to by email, where we would share terms of reference with everybody and ask for comments, and we would get comments only from a few people. So this is one example. The next step is involvement of senior management. And again, here, it's really important. We've tried to have an in-person meeting with our main client, or what we call our assistant director generals. So actually just an hour ago, we had a meeting with our assistant director general for Oceans. It's a new evaluation that we're starting. And again, it was important for us to sit around the table with him and ask him, what does he see in this evaluation? How can it be useful for him? Who should we involve? What are the questions that he wants answered? And it was mainly about, establishing that rapport with him, as again, he's not the only one, but we know that we need his buy-in in the process in order for the evaluation to then be taken forward and for any recommendations to be implemented later on. Now, another practice that we always do is we organize an in-person or an online inception workshop. Now, in person ideally, but if we want to have field colleagues participation, then we do this online because we think inclusivity and engagement is really key, and we don't want to exclude our colleagues in the field offices. And one of the questions we were asking ourselves was, so how can we make this Inception workshop more interactive? So how can we engage participants during the workshop rather than just, do the usual spiel of I present my methodology and my work plan? And so one of the things that we did last year for periodic reporting is that we had participants answer a series of polls about their work, and then we mapped the answers of these polls on a slide. So we basically created a spectrum, and here we're asking them what monitoring mechanisms they produce, whether they produce reports or others. And then we showed them the slide, and they can see where they stand. And usually when people see information about themselves, they are much more likely to stay engaged and respond later on when they're asked to provide input, right? So we found that this was actually a really good way of keeping people engaged in an Inception workshop for an hour and a half online, which is usually quite difficult to do. So all of these examples have been on the evaluation process. And now I'd like to share some information on what we do to share evaluation findings. Now, to share evaluation findings, we try and develop a brief communication plan. It's not an elaborate strategy, but we do ask ourselves these questions, who needs to receive the information and who needs to present the information? What should be presented? Some people, they just need a short summary, or they need numbers, or they need visuals, whereas other people are much more interested in the technical details. What format should the information be in? We've been going more and more on the basis that most people do not read full evaluation reports. So we've really been trying to diversify our knowledge products and go beyond evaluation reports. And finally, when is a good time to present to them? Is there a meeting that's coming up that's really important? Do we have a governing body meeting? Are there decisions to be taken? Timing is everything, really. So again, these are just some questions that we ask in our strategy. And when we present our evaluations, the first thing we do before we share a draft evaluation report with our clients is we organize an evaluation workshop. Again, for periodic reporting, we organized an in-person workshop. We wanted to have everyone around the table. It was really important. We consulted people way in advance to find a date that worked for everybody, and it was key. And during this workshop, what we tried to do is we tried to present, not bullet points, no text kind of heavy findings. We tried to present slides. I'm just giving you some examples here that were quite visual or quite fact-based, or some results of a survey of member states, again, to try and keep them interested, to see information that pertain to their particular reporting mechanisms, so to keep them engaged. And we found that this worked quite well. And in general, we've been trying to kind of upskill our PowerPoint skills and really move beyond the traditional way of doing presentations to keep things more interesting. Now, most of our evaluations go to some kind of governing body meeting, and as you can see, it's a very formal setting in this room. So usually, we have the standard PowerPoint presentations followed by question and answer. And in the last couple of years, we've tried to change that for some of our evaluations. And instead of doing a presentation, we made videos. And I'd like to show you just an excerpt of a video that we made on the evaluation of UNESCO's response to COVID-19. And we showed the video instead of a PowerPoint.
The COVID-19 pandemic has significantly disrupted the world, paralyzing entire sectors of activity, limiting access to education, sports and culture, restricting science and triggering the spread of false information about the virus. This crisis has often had a greater impact on women and vulnerable people, further amplifying existing inequalities. In 2022, 2 years after the outbreak of the virus, UNESCO's Division for Internal Oversight Services conducted an evaluation of UNESCO's response to the COVID-19 pandemic to assess UNESCO's programmatic response to the challenges brought about by the crisis. This video aims to briefly present the key findings and recommendations of this evaluation.
I won't show the full video. I think Patrick's going to share it in the chat. It's just to give you an idea that there could be another way of reaching a large group of people with a 4-minute video that is more interesting for them than to listen to a presentation. And finally, so one of the things we've been struggling with, I guess like many of us in UN agencies, is in the follow-up of evaluation. So we changed the way we communicate on the follow-up. So when we present an evaluation to the board, we draft a board paper. So, it's a summary of the full report, but we also include the management response in the board paper. So it's not a very exciting way to communicate, but at least it's there. And usually then that raises awareness not only of the member states of the evaluation, but the management is there at the table and has to answer questions about how they plan on taking the evaluation recommendations forward. And we found that this has definitely not only helped us in receiving management responses from all our clients, but it has also kind of given more visibility to evaluation and follow-up. And here I wanted to show an example of a communication piece for beneficiaries. So a few years ago, we did an evaluation of UNESCO's leadership and of the International Year of Indigenous Languages prior to the launch of a decade on the same subject. And we produced this product specifically for Indigenous peoples because the motto of the decade was "Nothing for us without us." And so here, this brief was produced in more languages, so in 4 different languages, and disseminated through specific networks for Indigenous peoples. And we received 1,500 hits. We don't know if that's a lot, but for us, given our previous experiences, that was quite a high number, so we were pleased. And this was in addition to the other communication products that we produced for this evaluation. I think that's it for my presentation. And given these examples, I wanted to run a poll because I think we have almost 80 people with us, and it would be really interesting to get your feedback on what do you do in your agencies. So besides evaluation reports and briefs, what communication products do you produce? And we'd be really keen on hearing your input. So we have videos coming up, evaluation newsletter, a podcast, drama scripts, internet pages, presentations, fact sheets, espresso sessions. That sounds interesting. Infographic, debriefings, screensaver graphics, synthesis reports, management responses, reports to all staff. Wow, we have 46 responses. This is really great and lots of food for thought for all of us, I think, to try some new things that we haven't yet tried out. I think there's maybe responses still coming in, but we'll keep these on record. And I thank you for your attention, and I stand by at the end of the session to answer any questions. And please feel free to reach out to me.
All right. Thank you, Katya, for sharing with us the good practices that UNESCO does in communicating evaluations. It was also personally interesting to see what participants shared when it comes to the different communication products, activities, besides reports and briefs. And for me personally, I thought the screensaver graphics and the drama scripts were particularly interesting. But it's all good ideas that maybe we can potentially look into maybe doing it in our respective entities and offices. So moving on, next we will have Janet Morawski, who's the Communication Knowledge Management Officer in the Evaluation Office in ILO. We also have Vanessa Clem, who's the Communications and Knowledge Management Intern from the same office. They'll be sharing about how the ILO Evaluation Office came up with its strategic communications plan for 2024-2025. And I was told that Vanessa played an instrumental role for the evaluation office in ILO on their strategic communications plan. So I look forward to hearing from her as well. Ladies, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hashka. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Vanessa and I have been very excited to present. For us at the ILO's Evaluation Office, when we talk about improving the use of evaluative evidence, it is necessary to build a communication plan that supports this endeavor. And so that's because we do not just want to simply throw content out there and see what sticks, but rather to be mindful and even methodological of what we are putting out there and how we are doing just that. And so this, of course, takes time and effort. So over the last few months, the ILO's Evaluation Office has had the pleasure of working quite closely with Vanessa Clem, our intern, who has really been spearheading this work by creating a strategic communication plan. And this new plan builds upon the previous one's achievements so that it supports our goals over the next couple of years. And so with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to Vanessa to talk a little more about it. So Vanessa, the floor is yours, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Janet, for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm really excited to present EVAL's new strategic communication plan. Our journey towards this plan started with an important realization. To truly impact and support the ILO's broader objectives, we needed to refine how we communicate our evaluation findings and evidence. Today, I'll share the highlights of our plan and the steps we took to develop it and how we envision transforming our communication efforts in EVAL. We conducted an in-depth assessment of our current communication practices. This assessment revealed both our strengths and areas that were needing improvement. For instance, while the office's evaluations are robust, we realized that we could do more in developing targeted communication outreach and tailored messaging. So the primary purpose of our strategic communication plan is to enhance the effectiveness and impact of our communication efforts, where we aim to ensure that our communication of evaluative evidence supports the ILO's goals by making information more accessible and engaging for stakeholders. Our assessment process was quite thorough. We reviewed best practices from other international organizations and academic research. We analyzed our web traffic, gathered insights from stakeholder interviews, and evaluated our social media performance, among other research methodologies. This multifaceted approach gave us a really comprehensive understanding of our current communication state and highlighted the gaps that we needed to address. So with that being said, our comprehensive communication assessment uncovered several key areas needing improvement. We identified the need to better integrate our communication efforts with EVAL's policies, strategy, and operations to ensure that our messaging was is consistent to make sure that everything lines up with what our stakeholders need. Stakeholder feedback also revealed the necessity to balance our communication of our independence while also demonstrating transparency, but also demonstrating that eval can provide supportive and engaging content to foster collaboration. We found that resource constraints, an issue that I'm certain many offices face, challenge our ability to maintain effective communication activities. We know through successful learning events and workshops in the past that engaging in in-person events is extremely effective in enhancing use and utility of evaluations. Additionally, our assessment highlighted the importance of creating more accessible and tailored communication materials to meet the diverse needs of our stakeholders within and outside of the ILO. Despite these challenges, we recognize that the first and fundamental step in increasing use and utility of evaluation is making it accessible, which eval achieved over 8 years ago through the success of a state-of-the-art iEval Discovery, which is our public dashboard, which displays all completed and planned evaluations. So that includes over 1,600 reports, more than 2,700 lessons learned, more than 1,400 good practices, and over 2,500 recommendations. These insights from the research that was conducted have directly shaped our strategic communication plan, and in ensuring that it is cohesive, inclusive, and aligned with broader ILO goals. Based on these findings, we outlined a few priorities. Based on these findings, we've outlined several priorities that the Evaluation Office is going to action. These include developing an integrated communication plan, which is currently in its final stages of approval. And within that, there is the need for tailoring our communication products, enhancing accessibility, strengthening stakeholder relationships, and maximizing resource allocation by leveraging our evaluation network and streamlining our communication processes. Each of these actions is designed to address the gaps that we've identified and leverage our strengths to be proactive rather than reactive in our communication. So now let's explore the strategic communication plan, eval's blueprint to enhancing visibility, use, and impact of evaluation through communication. Moving forward, our communication plan is aligned with and feeds into ILO's strategic plan, the evaluation policy, and the evaluation strategy. By aligning these frameworks, we are ensuring that tailored evaluative evidence reaches decision makers at the right time, enhancing learning, adaptation, and accountability. But what are the specific communication goals and how do we plan to achieve them? Our objectives are clear. We need to improve communication effectiveness, foster stronger stakeholder engagement, and support organizational learning and transparency. Each of our key stakeholder groups will receive targeted and tailored messaging through channels that work best for them. We asked them, they spoke, and now it's on us to deliver. We know our stakeholder interviews, which channels they prefer to receive information, and that's exactly how we plan to go through with it. So we're currently developing an implementation plan, monitoring and evaluation framework, and results-based communication framework to ensure that we are adaptive. The implementation plan is action-based. It details who, what, when, where, and how often specific communication products or campaigns are launched. Its purpose is to make sure that our communication efforts reach the right audiences at the right time. By continuously monitoring and evaluating our efforts, we can make necessary adjustments and improvements to meet the changing needs of our stakeholders while also keeping up with technological advancements. And finally, the results-based framework ensures that EVAL's communication activities remain relevant and impactful as they relate to strategic targets and indicators as part of the ILO strategy, EVAL strategy, and policy. These three components are necessary to measure our achievements for the next strategy period as well. And that is all from our side. I would like to thank you all for your attention, and I'll turn it back to the moderator.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Jenna and Vanessa, for your presentations. I think the audience got a better understanding of how ILO's Evaluation Office came up with its strategic communications plans, as well as the key takeaways and the importance of pinpointing the messaging to target the right audience at the right time, in their communications. So I see some questions already. So let's move on to the Q&A section. Let's see. I see the first question is from Elena. Who did the production of the video for the COVID-19 evaluation, and what were the costs? And I think that was this is for you, Katya.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. I think it's also related to something else I saw in the chat about dedicated resources for communication. Yes. So we do not have dedicated resources in that we do not have a communications person. We don't have an editor. What we do is we set aside some budget for communication. So the video, it was basically managed by a colleague from our office who asked several video companies for quotes, and we went with the company that was the cheapest. To give you an idea, so we made the video in 3 languages, English, French, and Spanish, and it cost us 7,000 euros. This included the drafting of the script and the content of the video, and then the creation of all the graphics that you can see in the video. So of course I think what we underestimated is the process and our involvement. So it's at least 1 month of intense work of back and forth of providing feedback on the different scripts and the content to get it right. But again, depending on who you're making the video for, right, it needs to be, the messages need to be done right. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you, Katya. Okay, so moving on, this is from Tian Tian. Could you elaborate on how you upskill and organize trainings around communication efforts and evaluation? Have you assessed the cost effectiveness of hiring communication experts for the evaluation office versus training and upskilling evaluators in communications?
We try to leverage as many human resources as possible because, of course, comms, the budget is quite small, of course. So we try to encourage our evaluation managers in the ILO to, apologies for that. Well, sorry, let me backtrack. We conduct around 70-ish independent evaluations every year. In order to do that, we have trained many evaluation managers and their volunteers. In this intensive 4 to 5 day training program, we do have a curriculum where I come in and I talk about the importance of communicating evaluation results, why that's important, and some very low-hanging fruit of how they can do that. At the same time, if we encourage them to also include in the terms of reference for any evaluation, a communicative, in addition to a evaluation report, we encourage the evaluator to create an interesting brief or a fact sheet, something like this, and then they can give it to us in the evaluation shop, and then we run with it and beautify it and all that sort of stuff. But as long as they, just we're just trying to leverage and do as much as possible with the little amount of resources that we have, but it has worked well with our training program.
You want to add on to that, Katya, or?
Yeah, sure. I think that I can. We're doing the same as what Janet just mentioned. So we've started putting in terms of reference communication products for consultants. So sometimes an evaluation team would also team up with a communication expert and produce the infographic or the brief. But we actually want them to already deliver the final product so that it already looks pretty and we don't have to go through our graphics department. So that has worked well. And most teams are either they already have the data visualization expertise or they find it. We have not, so we have had a few trainings in our office that have been very beneficial. So for example, we all did training in PowerPoint. We also had training in data visualization where we just brought in a consultant to our office for 2 half days. Again, it's not very high resource intensive, but it can really be eye-opening, even just on the way we present graphs and reports. So we've had 2 trainings like that. We have not done any kind of analysis on having a communication person, because that's just not a reality that we can for us right now. So we're trying to use our internal resources to the extent possible.
Yeah, no, thank you both for that. Let me move on to the next question. This is from Theogene. I have a question on definition of use. Some evaluation use theories have included misuse and non-use. Should we always assume good intention to use, or we should also include these in evaluation use spectrum to increase awareness about evaluation misuse or non-use instances? Curious to hear your thoughts. So this one we can actually, besides our speakers as well, we can open up to the floor to see if anyone else wants to add in as well.
Good afternoon, good morning. I don't know where everybody is. This is an important question for me because I think when it comes to evaluation, it's time intensive, resource intensive, and we always have limited resources to do evaluation properly. When it's done, some end up on the shelf, or even during the process. I think I was really very interested in your presentation on UNESCO process use. There are times when the evaluation is interrupted even during the process, whether it's methodology, etc. So there are instances of misuse intentional to sabotage or something. This is normal in real life. Now, my question is, should we assume there is always good intention for using evaluation for maximum improvement, learning, etc.? Because the reality on the ground is sometimes different. Could be political reasons, could be other reasons, could be maybe the program manager doesn't even want to get like the dirty linen, whatever. Anything's possible. Now, the theorists have included misuse in the spectrum from good use to non-use, everything. Shouldn't we bring these issues on board as well, so that we are aware, even if there's no intention within the UN system, to make sure that we know the difference between use, non-use, and misuse?
I think that what you're pointing out, I mean, we often refer to it in our office is the instrumentalization of evaluation. And we know that often if managers ask for evaluation, then they have an agenda, right? And they hope that the evaluation, or they expect the evaluation to bring out certain messages and defend a point that they are trying to show, right? So again, so I think maybe we could qualify that as misuse, or at least not necessarily maybe the use that we are aiming for. But I think that that's not something we can move away from. There's always going to be instrumentalization of evaluation, as long as we also encourage broader stakeholder use. I think that we can move beyond that. And the other thing I wanted to mention is I think that we can communicate very effectively. And I showed you the video on the COVID evaluation. And I think, it's much more attractive than a presentation. But then the evaluation was completed when we were actually coming out of COVID. And what we found in our office is that there wasn't much uptake for this evaluation, just because people wanted to move on already. We wanted to put COVID past us. So in a way, we had this excellent communication product, but that didn't mean that we got a lot of interest in the evaluation. So that would be kind of the downside. And I think that's also related to the other factors that would affect use.
Thank you, Katja. Janet, do you have anything to add on?
Not so much different. I mean, I really agree with what Katja mentioned, that, I mean, we're doing an evaluation because there's an appetite for it. Like, you know, senior managers, people are interested. If there are instances when, you know, there's, I mean, you use the word sabotage. If that happens, I mean, that's unethical. It shouldn't be happening in the first place. And if and when that does happen, it is unfortunate.
Yeah, so thank you, Janet. Anyone else who wants to mention a few words from the audience?
I think it's a very interesting point because within the group, as Poshika mentioned, we have different streams, and like one of them exactly directed to identifying some indicators which are measurable. So here I would have like a question, even if we include it and think through in our processes, which Katinka I saw quickly mentioned in the chat. In terms of indicators, I would see an issue before brainstorming how we will measure it. Because misuse or not use, it's something that we try to increase, but misuse, it's a little bit difficult. Because if you conducted evaluation according to ethical standards, according to defined methodology, triangulated findings well, to instrument it a little bit difficult because you do it correctly. But it's a very interesting point, and maybe we can note it down for the stream number 3, which conducts a research about wider use. And if we come up with some ideas how to capture it, yeah, we will share with you in the future webinars.
Yeah, thank you, Elena. No, yes, thank you, Theogene, for your question. That was it's really food for thought, I think, and I think our youth working group will, discuss about it and get back to you. And I think, Elena, you have the next question. What are the implications in terms of resources to produce all these different types of projects? Does the office have the graphic video production support? To Janet, please.
So yeah, thank you for the question. We have some in-house capabilities to do this, like the eval team in HQ, but we also have a dedicated communications department where that's all they do, internal and external communications. And they're working closely with them. They're able to help us out in amplifying our messages and being a lot more public on social media and all that sort of stuff. We also have budgets, or a small amount of budget, and it's not a lot, but to make our products a lot more user-friendly. And I use that like in a very targeted manner because folks are very visual, and people are looking for color and lovely formatted text and things that, are a little bit more different looking. So we try to really work with, we have a dedicated consultant who does this. So we really work closely with that person just to make things a lot more visually appealing. So it's all about bringing people in and encouraging them to stay. Yeah, so we try to, we don't have a big budget, but we try to leverage the resources that we have in terms of human resources. I know not everyone has a dedicated comms department, but if you do, have some conversations with them, and I bet that they'll be very willing to work with you. And it's worked well with us, actually.
Great, thank you, Janet.
At least within the realm of evaluations, when there are specific departments that are interested in demonstrate an appetite towards certain types of evaluative evidence, we've seen that they're also willing to dedicate resources towards developing products that share certain aspects of an evaluation, whether it's a pamphlet in terms of lessons learned or good practices, or how they are working towards the recommendations. It's not very often, but that said, that could be a leverage point.
Yeah.
I really forgot to mention that. It's a good point that Vanessa raises, because we do have, I mean, find your allies is another tip, right? Like there are plenty of people out there that you know, will work with you in order to amplify your messages. And sometimes chances are they might have a little bit of a budget to do that. So Katya mentioned earlier, like the importance of bilateral discussions. I mean, and I think that is a very poignant message that relates also beyond the evaluation reference group, for instance. So have discussions with folks outside and see how you can work together.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree on that as well. So in terms of budget, this is not related to specifically to communications, but Josephine has a question on how are evaluations budgeted for in UNESCO?
Yes, I just wanted to elaborate. You know, it's not just about budgeting for evaluations. I think you do a lot of you know, products from your presentation, and in a way, I think that has been answered in you know, from the conversations that we've been having so far, because you know, sometimes you leverage whatever is within the entity, you know, to help with the, you know, publication, communication, and all that stuff. But in terms of, you know, like, is that the budget for a specific evaluation, or there's an institutional level budget that helps you, you know, leverage all these other resources? So I thought I could just elaborate on my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Josephine. We have 6 program sectors at UNESCO, and every biennium, so every 2 years, they're required to set aside 3% of their operational program budget, and that's put on a separate account or separate budget line, and it's the evaluation office that is the holder of that budget line. So this is in the evaluation policy that we've had in place since 2014. And so we have this money that we use to do corporate evaluations, so corporate evaluations that are managed or conducted by our office. And then we also use this money for capacity building for staff that have to manage decentralized evaluations. That's project evaluations in offices around the world. And then we can use this money to fund some of our communication initiatives as well, such as the layout of our reports and you know, the videos that I mentioned and some of the briefs.
Great, thank you. We're running out of time, so let me ask the last question from Katinka. In terms of return on investment, beyond the number of hits that Katya referred to, were you able to measure use, for example, both conceptual and process use? And could you attribute any of that to the use of communication strategies and tools?
It's a very big question and a hard one. Can we measure, to the extent to which can we measure process use, right? That's a hard one. What we did, Vanessa, is Vanessa, she crunched numbers when numbers were available to us, right? Like the hard stuff, how many people downloaded our report, accessed our website, like asked for like all this sort of stuff. That was easy, but the extent to which we were able to figure out, yeah, the process use side is hard. I don't even know how to, yeah, that's a hard one. I don't know if Vanessa, if you want to elaborate a little bit more.
Well, in terms of process use, I think it really depends on the internal structures that you have during an evaluation process, in like monitoring the uptake of recommendations, their responses to it, and yeah, essentially how the evaluand is working with evaluative evidence. But in terms of after the fact, so after an evaluation is complete, and how others interact with the final product, that's where things get interesting. In terms of my communications background, something, you know, a tool that we use often is a media monitoring tool like Meltwater, where you can essentially, it scours the web, whether it's podcasts, press releases, news, anything that's mentioned in the news or any online content, it will notify you of your content's use. And that's a nice way of keeping an eye on material that is used that is external to, say, policy or strategy mentions.
Let me thank all our speakers today for presenting and having this very interesting discussion on communication strategies and how we can, improve evaluation use. And as you might remember from the beginning of the webinar, like one of the works that the UNEG Use of Evaluation Working Group does is to organize webinars on evaluation use. So we hope to have another webinar sometime in September, October, but we will let colleagues know about the upcoming webinar through the UNEG mailing list. And we'll be sharing the survey on the seminar through the chat, but also by email. So it would help us greatly if you can take a few minutes to respond to the survey and help us improve our webinars. So thank you all for your participation today, and I hope you have a great day.